Hi, tech writing students. Welcome to my explanation of the mechanism description assignment, which is coming up pretty soon here. And I just wanted to give you a bit of an overview for it. And this will go with the assignment sheet that I have for the mechanism description, which I will hand out in class. But you also have it available on Canvas, so you can take a look at it there. So the mechanism description is this really, I think, exciting assignment. It sort of gets down to the heart of what perhaps made you excited about engineering in the first place. If you were the kind of kid who liked to pull things apart and figure out how they work or see what would happen inside the machine, try to figure out how something worked and how the people who designed it actually made their decisions and why. So this is a really great opportunity to do that. Not on a super large scale. The scope of this assignment isn't too crazy, but you want to pick a mechanism that's complex enough to be interesting and simple enough to be able to do it in kind of the time and space that we have. And you want to then describe it. So it's a mechanism description. So how do we define a mechanism? A mechanism, our textbook defines in this really sort of generic way. It's a synthetic object consisting of a number of identifiable parts that work together. So that number, obviously parts is plural, so the number has to be 2 or more. And it's a synthetic object. So what we mean is man-made or human-made. So you might, if you're, let's say, a biomedical engineer or biologist, you might say like, oh, I wish I could do a mechanism description on muscle fiber or something like that. The mechanism description assignment will help you be able to explain that, but this is kind of an opportunity for you to find an object, a thing that is human-made and human-designed and really pull it apart either literally or figuratively and figure out how it works, how it was put together, why the engineers made the decisions they made in deciding size, shape, material, how everything fits together, and how they work to do the thing that that mechanism is supposed to do. So you don't want to pick something that's way too complicated. And so the couple examples I have on here are a television, way too complicated, and too many electrical components as well. The Starship Enterprise has 2 things wrong with it. One, of course, is that it's too complicated. There are many decks and lots of stuff going on in the Starship Enterprise, but the other more problematic thing is that it's fictional. And so it isn't an imaginary future. Their core is made of something called dilithium, which, as far as I know, isn't really a thing. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's a fictional thing. Or maybe it's lithium, but somehow double. In any case, we don't have the technology to move at warp speed to surpass the speed of light in any way when it comes to a starship. So the Enterprise is off limits, as is anything else that's sort of magical or fictional or has an element of that kind of thing in it. That said, sometimes people pick toys that are representative of that fictional world. So I did once have a student who described, I guess I haven't watched Doctor Who, so I don't really know Doctor Who, but there's this like staff thing with a light in it that opens. And so I had a student that had a toy version of that. And you'd press a button and the thing would pop open and there was like a little light bulb in it. And so she described that. So that would be fine. Too simple would be things like a ruler or a paper clip. Typically you want it to have moving parts. There are some exceptions to that. You can have something that's stationary, but it should be really, really detailed. So an example of something that's kind of stationary that ended up being a really great mechanism description was a student who described her ice skate. She was a figure skater. And at first I thought, an ice skate, is that really detailed enough? As it turns out, there's a lot going on with an ice skate. The blade itself and the blade geometry has to do with how the skate cuts into the ice and how it glides along. And then the front of the skate has all these little ridges or points, and each point has a different purpose, and they're different sizes and sharpnesses. And then how the back of the skate comes out, or the back of the blade comes out has something to do with the way escape functions as well. And she also described the shoe part and the laces, but spent most of the time on the blade. And so, so that's an example of something that doesn't really have moving parts so much if you don't count the shoelaces. And yet it was pretty detailed and a really interesting mechanism. So we're going to be discussing in class, definitely, a binder clip, a potato peeler, and I may give you a couple of examples that are an adjustable wrench or a pepper mill. I may not. I think I'm also going to give you an example that is a staple remover. So any examples we discuss in class, don't write about those. Don't pick those as mechanisms. There's another mechanism that's off limits, and it's off limits because I am sick of it. So I'll mention this in class as well as to why you cannot do a nail clipper. Nail clippers are the perfect level of complexity. They're interesting. One side hinges around. You got leverage. Two little thin sides come together. They clip the nail, but they're not sharp on their own. It's really cool, right? So one semester I had 14 students in a section of tech writing, and 8 of them wrote about nail clippers. 8. So I was reading the stack of papers, and I grade 1, and it was about a nail clipper. Oh, that's interesting. And then I flipped to the next one, and it was another nail clipper. And I flipped to the next one, it was another nail clipper. So I am sick of nail clippers the way those of you who have been at WashU for a while may be sick of Subway sandwiches. I'm a WashU alum as well. I ate at Subway a lot as an undergrad, and I pretty much swore by senior year that I would never eat Subway again. And I didn't until I was like 25. So someday I may add nail clippers again to the approved list for the mechanism description. For now, don't write about nail clippers. A couple other things. As we discuss possible topics, I am going to actually send out a Sign Up Genius link where you sign up for your mechanism. So you have your name in there, and then you write what your mechanism is going to be. It's a free answer thing, so it's not like I have a list of approved mechanisms. You can decide on your own mechanism. But when you look at the sign up, make sure you're not repeating somebody else's. I want, for each of my classes, whether you have 15 people in your class or 16 people in your class, I want 15 unique mechanisms for that class. It's okay if there's repetition from one class to another, because, you know, if I have to read about 2 corkscrews, no big deal. But I don't want to read about 8 corkscrews. A few really good places to look. Office supplies. Office supplies are really wonderful. So if you just look around your desk or dig in your backpack, you might find some really interesting stuff. I'm looking around here. Here's a pen. This pen is pretty interesting. The cap uncaps and pops back on, but it's not a screw. It's just kind of a friction fit, so that's kind of interesting. And then the pen does its thing. How does the ink get from inside of it out the ballpoint? And is this one of those pens that writes upside down? And if it does write upside down, how does that work? How does the ink actually do that and not sort of fall prey to gravity, making it sort of flow back down? So different kinds of pens and pencils have interesting things. Mechanical pencils that click on the back or that click on the front, and the lead, we call it lead, but it's made of graphite, of course, comes out the front when you click, and then it stops, and somehow when you click and you hold the top down and you push that lead down on a piece of paper or a desk, it actually goes back in the mechanism. This is very weird and interesting, and it's a cool design. And so mechanical pencils are really cool too. I'm kind of looking around to see some different stuff in my office that might work. Staple remover, of course, we're going to be talking about in class, so you won't be able to write about that. Let me tell you what's too complicated. That guy. Stapler, way too complicated. Don't even try it. Seriously. If I see the sign-up sheet and I see somebody write stapler in there, I'm going to send you an email saying, this is probably not a very good decision. Reconsider. I'm not going to absolutely ban stapler, but I will tell you this. In order to do it justice, I think you're going to need at least 20 pages. That's probably longer than you really want to commit yourself to. There's a lot going on with a stapler. There's springs, and there's a sort of a row of staples that gets pushed, and there's an anvil where the staple crimps on the bottom. It's a big thing. You might be like, but it seems kind of simple. Once you dig into it, it's a lot. Your musical instruments can be really interesting. Obviously, you cannot describe the whole instrument because it's way too much. It's like too much detail. And again, the scope of that is too huge. But you might pick a portion of it. So you might like think about a tuning peg on a guitar and how it works with the string. Or I've had people describe a guitar capo, which is, to my understanding, something that clips. It's like a clip that goes on the neck of the guitar on the strings and effectively shortens the length of the strings on your instrument so that when you pluck them, you get different notes. So that's kind of neat. So sometimes like add-ons to your instrument. So I'm trying to think, we have a piano at home, which the piano itself is way too detailed. Even one key and all the stuff that goes on in the piano is way too detailed. But my son is 8 and he plays the piano. We have this step stool bench that actually has 3 pedals on it, and the pedals have a little presser foot underneath them that pushes down on the real pedal of the piano because he's short, so he can't reach the pedals yet. So this step stool, you push it in, you push it just right where when you press down one of the pedals of the step stool, underneath there's this little panel, and that thing pushes down the real pedal of the piano to do whatever the 3 pedals do. And so that step stool with the pedals might be a good level of detail. So musical instrument pieces can be good, but not the whole thing. Then toys are awesome. Toys are super interesting. So if you're feeling really uninspired and you're like, I don't know, I've looked around my house, I don't really see anything I want, you could always go to a dollar store and find something that is like some cheap toy that is a candy dispenser or, you know, winds up in some way, and you could describe that. Those are sort of interesting. So really what you're thinking of a lot is a little bit more of the simple machines. Things that have levers and hinges and sort of connections that are interesting in that way. You know, they may have a pulley or something like that. Obviously, you know, there's the 6 simple machines, but even other types of things that are fairly simple that you can think of, oh, there might be a spring here that's doing something or a hinge here that's doing something. How does this interact? Your kitchen is a gold mine for stuff. Your kitchen, and then especially if you're going home at any point, your parents' kitchen might, or your friend's parent who lives in town, they might have that random drawer of stuff that's really interesting. Kitchens have a lot of one-use tools. We're going to be talking about vegetable peelers, and so those are off limits, but the drawer that has the vegetable peeler in it has all sorts of other interesting stuff. So my drawer at home has, there's a cherry pitter, which it's sort of sprung open, and you stick a cherry or an olive in it. It works for 2 purposes, cherries and olives. You stick a cherry in it, you squeeze, and this sort of, I wouldn't know what to call that cylinder, maybe a blade, maybe something. I'd have to come up with a name for it. But when you squeeze it, it pushes the pit. It sort of forces the pit out of the cherry, and you end up with a cherry with a big hole in it, but the pit is out. And it works for olives too. So cherry pitter, garlic press, various kinds of vegetable steamers that collapse or expand. You might have different kinds of slicers or graters for things. Corkscrews. I've got at least 2 designs of corkscrews in that random drawer. I have the winged corkscrew and the waiter's key, which is it lays flat and it's a little bit more compact. You open it up and then you screw and ratchet up the cork. So that's kind of an interesting one as well. And for those of you who are interested in doing corkscrews as a possibility, you can choose different designs, and I'll count them as different mechanisms. So if one of you wants to do the corkscrew with the 2 levers, and then one wants to do a waiter's key or waiter's corkscrew, those are pretty different, and I'd be okay with 2 different designs of corkscrews. So that's kind of that kitchen drawer that has all the random stuff. I will say this, pizza cutter is too simple. Once you describe the blade and the blade geometry, once you describe the handle, you're pretty much done. It's pretty basic. So I would say go one step more complicated than pizza cutter. Different kinds of coffee makers are really interesting too, or tea, what are those things called? The tea balls, where you squeeze the spring and it pops the strainer open. Coffee makers like a French press can be really good, or some of those hipster coffee makers that they have down at kayaks. AeroPress or pour over coffee maker. Like, there's a lot of different kinds of coffee makers that are out there that are really interesting. A traditional drip coffee maker or an espresso machine might be too detailed, but you could pick a portion of it to describe, like the pump mechanism or something like that. So that is some interesting stuff in your kitchen that might be useful. Other possibilities. So we got office, we have kitchen, musical instruments, toys. Really just kind of look around your house. Your toolbox is a great place too, those of you who have tools and use them. There's all kinds of adjustable wrenches and vice grips and, screwdrivers that the bit fits into, and you can replace the bit into different things, ratcheting screwdrivers, ratcheting wrenches, all kinds of cool stuff. So that's, as you're choosing a topic, some just advice on where to look. And if you have any questions, of course, feel free to ask me. Come to me before or after class, send me a quick email. Hey, how does this sound? I'll be able to tell you if it's something that sounds too complicated or too simple. It doesn't have to be some sort of impressive for sale mechanism. It could be something that you've designed, either a prototype of something that you're working on, or just some random thing that you rigged up. I had a student who rigged up a pulley system. So she lived on the South 40 in the dorms, and she, I guess, always lamented the fact that when she was reading a book at night, then she wanted to turn off the light. She didn't have a bedside lamp, so she couldn't just reach over and turn off the light, and the light switch was across the room. So she rigged up with command hooks and twine, I think, and tape. She rigged up the system in her room that basically she could pull one string and the light would turn off, and then she could pull another string and the light switch would turn on across the room. And so she described that. Or the student who, I guess he and his roommates freshman year decided that they wanted cold water at all times, maybe after that super hot first day of school that you all pretty much always have. And so they bought one of those water coolers, the office water coolers, and the 5-gallon bottle of water that goes on top of it. Well, those bottles of water are expensive, and they wanted instant cold water, but they didn't care if it was tap water or not. So instead of buying more of those bottles, they decided to just refill the bottle they have, except it's a huge bottle and they couldn't get it in the sink. So they cut open some Solo cups and they duct taped some of it together to create almost like a luge funnel system to get water from their sink into this water bottle. And he described that. So you can do that. You can describe things that you've designed that are a little bit more formal than that. I had a student who worked in a lab, and they were working on figuring out the mechanics behind ACL tears, and they were using dead rabbits. So I guess they use the term sacrifice. So they sacrificed the rabbit or the bunny before doing this. But basically they needed a machine to repeatedly stress the bunny's ACL until it tore to kind of record the stresses on it. So she built an ACL tearing machine for dead bunnies. And it was made of plexiglass and wood, and you would be able to slide the bunny back and forth, and there was some sort of hammer that you could deliver blows on the bunny's, hind or forearm, and I guess they were using the forearms, I don't remember, but whatever leg or arm of the bunny they were using, this thing would deliver the same blow over and over again, so they could measure the force of the blow, or they knew it. And so she built that and she described it. So there's a lot of possibility there for things that you've made. So as you're kind of imagining different things, weapons are great. Just don't bring them to class. If you decide to describe a weapon, when I ask you to bring your mechanisms to class, I'm okay with little pocket knives and stuff. You probably already have those things in your pocket if you're a pocket knife person, but don't bring your sword or your guns, certainly we don't allow those on campus. You can keep them at home and maybe bring in a picture or something instead to show us of your weapon that you're describing. Guns are way too complicated, but there may be something that's just a mechanism within a gun, or like the bullet itself. Sometimes I've had students describe a bullet that does something. Sometimes bullets do, like they explode or get crushed on impact or things like that. So weapons are kind of another place you can look to. We're going to talk a lot about the structure of the mechanism and what it looks like. Lengthwise, you're going to want at least 4 pages double-spaced of text. So that's kind of the minimum, but there are going to be lots of images here too. And you should really think about when what you're saying can be well complemented by an image. That was passive voice. I will figure out a way to say that in active voice. But the image complements the text. There you go. So think about how you would want to represent this stuff visually. Basically, anytime if you were holding the mechanism, like let's say I'm describing this pen, anytime I wanted to like explain something and I felt the urge to point at something, like the way these two things connect, the cap and the pen, when you slide the cap on, there's this little ridge over here on the pen that the cap has to push over, and that's what makes it fit in and click. I felt compelled to point to it to show you. So that would be a place where you'd include an image, a picture or a drawing that you then would draw an arrow to what you were showing and label it. So think about when you're going to need images to complement your pictures. You can take digital camera pictures or camera phone pictures. They actually are really good these days. Your camera phones are great. They make, they do clear, sharp, awesome pictures. So that's a really great way to get exactly the angle on the thing you want, exactly what you want to do. If you are a little artistic or are feeling a little artistic, go ahead and hand draw stuff. You certainly can. It's okay. Even if you're not that artistic, I'm not going to, take off points for squiggly lines. If your lines are a little squiggly, no big deal. But if you're like, what I want to illustrate, I can't take a picture of it. I just want to draw it. I want to draw it because I feel like it's going to be better. Cool. Draw it. There are lots of really neat examples that I have of students who have done hand drawings, and you can mix the different media. So if you want to do a hand drawing on one thing and then take a picture of another, that's fine. Typically students decide to do it one way and then do that throughout the paper, but sometimes you need one image that's a hand drawing, even though you're doing camera phone pictures for everything else or something like that. And that's okay. The other thing that you can do by hand, Word makes it really difficult sometimes to label things with an arrow and then, put the word in. And if it's a text box, then every time you move something, everything moves around. If you want to take a ruler to it and draw in a line and write it in by hand, you can on your final draft. So we'll definitely talk about the format of it. I just wanted to give you a little bit about the scope of the mechanism description as a whole. You're going to be introducing it then, defining what the mechanism is, telling us a little bit about it, defining what the parts are, and giving us an overview image. And then you'll go part by part and describe each part, describing what it's made of, what the shapes are in it, and then what the features are and how those features work together and connect with each other and connect with other parts. And this is just really cool. It's a cool chance for you to just learn how a thing works. And you'll discover that the simplest things that you rely on every single day, you had no idea that so much thought went into making them. When we talk about binder clips in class, binder clips are these things here. Let me grab one. They're these things. When we talk about these in class, I think you'll just sort of be amazed at the level of both simplicity and complexity of them. There's so much complex thought into the shapes, the materials, and the exact way this is put together that it's so simple. And it's just really neat. People thought of this, engineers thought of this, and they figured out how to do this in a way that makes it really streamlined and easy to use and strong. So you'll discover that about your mechanism as well, I think. And if you have criticisms about it, if there are design improvements, Conclusion's a great place for that. Or even as you're describing the parts, like if you're, a thing is made of metal, but it's not corrosion resistant, at that point you could say, my mechanism is rusting a little bit and it would have been a better choice if they had made it from something corrosion resistant. So as you describe your mechanism, it can really be your mechanism. If it has a little rust on it, you can describe the rust. If it used to say something but the word is rubbed off, you can describe that. And so you can get pretty detailed about your mechanism specifically. The examples, we'll look at the staple remover one, which is the one I give out kind of as a good example, and it's that sort of good level, sweet spot of complexity. It's about 11 pages long, and that includes images. So there's a lot of images in there. It's about 11 pages long. And so the actual text of that, the text in there, it's probably about 5 pages of text, maybe a little more. But for the most part, there's just a lot of images. And so it's a good example. It's also very well organized. But there's 2 or 3 others I've put up on Canvas, so you can take a look at how different people approached it. Obviously, if you read one of them on Canvas and it's about a particular mechanism, don't describe that mechanism. There's no way you're going to be able to do it differently enough to be able to think of your own stuff in the process. So, so if you want to look at those examples, then don't pick one of those mechanisms. But I didn't put like 10 or 20 examples. I just put a couple or a few because I don't want to inundate you with examples and then basically say, hey, those topics are off limits now, because there are a lot of good topics out there. As you brainstorm, there's like a brainstorming section down here, and you should brainstorm those ideas about your mechanism. You're not going to have to do all of these things in your paper. You're not going to have to be able to describe every single secondary purpose for tongs, or every single secondary purpose for a binder clip. But it's nice to know. To get to know your mechanism inside and out, you're really going to want to figure out everything you could do with it, all of the features of it. And that means spending some time exploring it. You do not have to take apart your mechanism to understand it well. Depending on what it is, you might not want to break it. And I understand, obviously, if it's expensive or if it's something useful that you use, don't break it. Don't like ruin your thing. Figure out what you can from what you can see. But if it's a mechanism where everything's hidden inside of it and you can't get into it, then it's not a good choice. You should not have to do a lot of online research or even a medium amount of online research to figure out how this thing works. This is an observation exercise. This is you take this thing and figure out how you think it works. You name the parts, whatever you think they're named or they should be named, and then you go in and describe what you see. If you have to look up one thing, fine. Sometimes people look up what the material actually is. Like, oh, hey, this Camelback water cup is made of some sort of plastic. I'm interested in what plastic it is. Cool, you can look it up. That's fine. But it's also okay in the paper to just say some sort of durable plastic. And we don't have to know what kind of plastic it is. So you can look up materials. Sometimes people look up some interesting history of it to include in the intro or the conclusion. And that's great. So you can get background information like that. But the mechanism description itself, the description of how this pen works or whatever, that should be from you. That should be from you and your own observation, your own figuring it out. This is one of your cool chances to hone your skills as an engineer and as an observer. And I think it'll be really neat what you come up with. So you are going to get a Sign Up Genius link to sign up for mechanisms. Basically, look at what people have signed up for before you, and as you look at those topics, make sure you don't repeat one of them. But you can basically do whatever you want. Every semester there's a mechanism that I've never even heard of that ends up in there. Sometimes different kinds of sports equipment. Those of you who are rock climbers, you've got all kinds of buckles and carabiners and things that lock and all that kind of stuff. Or if you do water sports, there's just all kinds of cool stuff. So look at the world around you. Look at the things you use every day or that you're using at some point and figure out, hey, like, how does this thing work? Would this be a good scope for this mechanism description? And if it is, then that should be the thing you describe. If you are passionate about learning about it, you're excited to figure out how it works. I will let you know if I see any red flags about a topic. If I see that something seems like you've bitten off a little more than you can chew, it's going to be surprisingly complex, something like that. In order to get an A+ on this paper, for those of you who are aiming that high, you have to pick something pretty complex. It has to be a stretch. So if you pick something that has like a reasonable level of complexity, but it's not a stretch, and if you kill it, you do a great job, you might still get an A- or an A. You know, if it's a little on almost too simple side, A- might be as high as you can go. If it's kind of that good medium level of complexity, A. For those of you who are like, I wanna shoot for the stars here, pick something that's a little bit hard. Pick something that's maybe gonna take a little extra. So, you know, of all of the examples I've given, something like a mechanical pencil or different kinds of retractable pens, those are tough. Those are really tricky. I will say this, umbrella is too tricky. You should just steer clear of umbrella altogether. There's way too much going on. But I did have a student do that once. She did get an A+ on the paper, but it was 13 pages single spaced. So in order for her to do that well, it had to be that long, which is crazy. You guys don't actually want to do that to yourselves. So skip umbrella. But things that kind of have that level of complexity that's maybe about online with a mechanical pencil or a retractable pen, the ones that you click and the ballpoint comes out and then it pops back in. Those are the kinds of things that can be really complex and interesting and could put you in that category where you end up having a shot at a higher grade at that A+. So really an A+ on this assignment means that you picked something really challenging. You described it in an exceptional way, like it really stands out. So with grades on all of these papers, don't think of it like a math test where, well, if I did everything right, I should get 100. Really, an A paper in any of these is exceptional. It stands out. You've done everything well, and you've taken on something challenging, and you've done it in a really interesting way. So there are definitely papers where you could get some sort of B+ or A-, and you've done everything right. And you might say, what did you take points off for? Don't think of it as taking points off. Really, a B means that you did everything well, and an A means that you went above and beyond and you really killed it. So, so an A is sort of exceptional. When you think of your chemistry classes that grade on a curve, that's not what I'm doing here. It's not a curve, and a C is not what I think of as average for a WashU student. I really think that if you guys work and you do something really nice that turns out good, generally speaking, the average that I see among WashU students is B work, where some things could use a little more description, some things are well described, some things are a little vague, but on the whole, if you actually gave this to, let's say, a patent attorney and they needed to know how this thing works, they'd be pleased with it. That would be about a B. That A quality work, that's professional level work. And I know you all are capable of it. It might just take a few drafts. So, but certainly if you do everything you should end up with some sort of B on this paper. So that's a little bit about grading. Typically, we do rough draft conferences with this paper. So typically what you might see at a rough draft conference, if you're like curious about your grade at that point, I can give you a little estimate as to what you would get on this rough draft. I would say the vast majority of rough drafts I see come through where people have actually really tried it's a complete draft end up about in the B range. And so that's why I love doing rough draft conferences, because then you can take that thing, you can push it up to the next level and end up in the A- or A range somewhere. And often that means adding more detail.